Welcome to Between Authors. I'm your host, author Adrian Lopez. What is it that excites us as a reader? It's finding that author or book that you may never have heard of, sort of like the treasure hunt for a reader. The goal for my podcast is to bring to you either those authors or books that you may never have found, but may be the treasure you've been hunting for all along. Today in episode 59, I bring to you author Tina Hogan Grant. We're going to go over a little bit about who she is, what she's published, maybe what she's working on, and what her plans are for the future. Welcome to the show, Tina.
Hi, and thank you so much for having me. I am so happy to be here.
Absolutely. I'm happy to have you here today as well. Why don't you begin by giving an introduction to yourself to the viewers?
Okay, I'm originally from England. I came over here in 1979. I followed my dad, so it's his fault I'm here. But I started late in life when it came to my passion for writing. I've always loved to read, always loved to write, but I took it seriously in, oh my gosh, what are we in, 2024? I'm going to say 2010, 2011, because in 2010, my father passed away. And in 2011, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And I've always had this idea for a book. But you know how it is. We all know how it is, that life just gets in the way. I'll get to my book. Yeah. I'll get to my book. But after those two events, I told myself, I'm going to write this book. I better knuckle down. So that's when I started to write these beginnings, but it took another 8 years. And after the 8 years, it was in 2018. And I thought, okay, I have this idea for a book. It's out there. I have this strong message I want to put out there. But I had so much fun writing it. I discovered I want to do this again. And 2018, I have published now 15 books. So
yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it seems to be a common theme among most of the authors that I talk to, even myself. We all love writing, but we didn't do it right away. We took a long time to make that decision do it, right? And it's once you do, you really feel that it was something you really desire to do, because once you do it, once you kind of answer that call of your soul of what you want to do, it's a completely different experience, right? And it's very interesting. And I like to always say, for those that haven't made that decision yet, or those that haven't taken the leap to do it, is regret is always going to be so much worse than failing, right? So when you have those things you want to try to do, or you really think about, do them, right? Just do them, and take the chance and write the book. Try to write the book.
Yeah, and I always tell friends of mine or writers of mine that want to publish a book, they have a book published, and this is what held me back a lot too. Not just the time that it took to write the book, but the reaction of putting my book out there. What kind of feedback was I going to get? And the fear held me back a lot. It held me back a lot. But you have to remind yourself that your book is not for everybody. We write for an audience. We have our readers. We're all on this journey, going our separate ways, and your readers will find you. Your book is not for everyone. And that's the thing I had to keep reminding myself when my first book came out. And I tell writers that want to publish that I'm afraid that it's going to get bad reviews and people are not going to like it. And I said, and I have to remind them, your book won't be for everybody, and that's okay.
You have to expect that bad review, right? It was interesting. Last night, I actually got my first 1-star review on the book, and the individual hated everything. Just hated everything about it. But it's going to happen. You can't take it personal, because you're right. I mean, that's the reason. Not everybody loves certain types of music or certain movies.
Exactly.
You're not going to get 100% of people to love it.
Yeah, there's certain movies that are raved and get Oscars. Okay, I'm gonna watch this movie, and I'm like, why?
I know.
Why did this movie get so much attention? It wasn't my movie. And movies I love, some people don't like, and that's just what it's like in the book industry. And we have to learn to grow a tough skin. You get
Yeah.
that 1-star review, it's okay. Move on. If it's a critical review, a critic review that, you know, someone gave you some advice, great, learn from it. But move on. Don't let it stop you from following your dreams.
Yeah. I mean, and it really goes back to anything you do in life, I don't care what it is, you'll get better at it, right? You're not going to be perfect at it the first time you do it. You may do it extremely well, but you're not going to be, you're just going to get stronger. You'll get better at it with anything. The more you practice.
Yeah. And we learn from our mistakes and we learn from our fears.
Yep.
Yeah. You got to face the fears head on.
Yeah. It's an interesting, you know, approach to do this, because it is difficult for some people to take that leap for that reason, right? And again, writing is like any form of art, right? Music, again, or any of that. It's very personal to you, right? And it is difficult to just lay it out there, put it out there, and just say, okay, here it is.
Yeah, it really is, especially with the debut novel for me. And I'm sure a lot of authors feel the same, but this was my baby. For 8 years, no one else saw it but me and my editor. No one.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I'm just supposed to let it out to the world? I mean, that's like, whoa. And I still have those anxieties, even after 15 books, that how is this book going to get received? But what's made it easier, and I learned this after my first 2 books, is I got a review team. And the review team kind of gives me, you know, some, what's what I'm thinking of? Some confidence. They see the book before the rest of the world, and I get the feedback from them. So for me, knowing that my review team enjoyed it, I feel a lot better putting it out in the world. But for the first 2 books, I didn't have a review team, and I was like, oh my God.
Are you using them kind of like ARC readers? Is that how you're doing it?
I call it review team, but I have ARC readers. I have 30 on my team, and they get a copy of the book. What happens is I write the book, it goes to the editor. After the first round of edits, I then send it to my ARC team. I don't want it to go to them without any edits. So my editor reviews it, goes through it once, does her magic, I call it. And my review team know that it's still going through edits. And I tell them, if you find errors, grammar mistakes, or something is not reading right, don't let that take you away from the story. It's still going through edits. And they all know this. And I ask them, of course, you know, once the book goes live, please leave your reviews. But I also want feedback from you while you're reading the book. If there's something that's not flowing, or if you're engaged, I just have a little simple questionnaire. Are you engaged in the book? Are you losing interest anywhere in the book? Things like that. Is there something you don't like about the book? So I kind of get a little bit of feedback from my 30 ARC readers before the book goes live. And if out of those, it's 10 questions, and out of those questions, there's something in there that's common, then I need to make a change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, it goes back to they may not all have the same feedback. And again, it goes back to not everybody's going to interpret it the same way, right? So it's very interesting how it works. I'm using beta readers from my zombie book right now, and I'm doing it much larger scale than I did it on my werewolf book, to get more of that feedback, to really feel, you know, that, like you said, is the plot dragging at some point? Do the characters feel right? Is there something you don't like about a character? Is there something, you know, all those little questions to make sure everything's kind of gelling, because it's really that connection with the reader that makes that experience for them the best. And if something's not connecting, you kind of want to know, right? So what is not connecting for you? What's not working?
Exactly. And the more eyes you have on your work, the better. Because we, as you know, as authors, read our book how we want it to read. And we're going to skip over things that don't sound right, or something we just don't pick up on. But, you know, you have 20, 30 eyes on your book. They're going to pick up on what we don't see.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, once you start reading it for the 8th time or whatever, you're not going to catch anything anymore.
No. The one thing I have found that helped for me, and I only started doing this, I think, about for the last 6 books, is it goes through 2 edits. It comes back to me. The last thing I do is I read my book out loud. And I never realized how much I pick up when I'm reading it out loud versus in my head. And that's made a lot a lot of changes to me as far as when I notice that a sentence is not flowing. If I have to stop in a sentence, why? I immediately stop and say, what in that sentence caused me to stop?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
so
that's a good tip. I've heard a lot of other authors mention they use the audio function in like Word or any of those to just listen to it, almost like an audiobook.
I've
So
tried that,
yours is a good one too.
Yeah, I like listening to my own voice, and it's all personal preference. And the
Yeah.
reason why I don't do the Word is it doesn't pick up on the ground. The comma that I just keep. So I have to because it doesn't pick up on the grammar. But if I'm reading, I know there's a comma there. But it's all personal choice.
Yeah.
I just like listening to my voice, and I know, where I stopped. Why did I stop? And I'll backtrack.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good tip.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't let's talk about influences, right? What influences you for your stories or as a writer? Again, it doesn't have to necessarily be books and authors. It could be music, art, anything.
Well, my mentor, and has been from day one, is my dad. My dad was an author. He was a science fiction author. He wrote 38 books. He was very successful. And we grew up around books. We didn't have any TV in the house. It was reading, writing. But I watched him follow his passion. He also worked full-time for his first 3 books. After his 3rd book, he was able to quit and write full-time. But the dedication that he put into what he really wanted to do just, inspired me. So my dad has always been my inspiration when it comes to my writing. And it's because of him that I love books. I love to write. Sadly, it took me a long time to write my first book. But whenever anyone asks who's my mentor, my inspiration, it's always my dad. Always. And his name's James P. Hogan, by the way, science fiction author.
Yeah.
Little plug there.
That's great. I mean, yeah, it's a lot of the influences from when you were young, things that got you into that stuff. I have 2 kind of similar ones. I have, horror movies in general is a big influence for me. But really similar to you, the biggest influence for me was really my uncle. Because my uncle actually, he loved books, right? He just absolutely adored books. He learned how to do bookbinding the old-fashioned way, and he would sit there and carve the paper and carve the thing and make that.
Oh my Lord!
I mean, he when he did that kind of stuff, he just would go all out into it, and he just loved books, right? He just loved everything about them, and he was the one that got me into a lot of, reading of everything, right? Sci-fi, horror, historical stuff, some Japanese stuff, and he broadens your influence. And he's really the one that got me into all of this, right? And it's very similar to you with your dad and his writing, that to see the dedication to books in general, the love he had for books, you almost, you can't help but to kind of to get on the train with it, right?
Exactly.
You could feel the passion and love in there.
Yeah, I mean, he worked full-time. My mother didn't work. It was back in the day when, a mother didn't have to work. She was there to raise the kids. And he'd work full-time for a computer company, come home, and after dinner, he was up in his office. And the typing, he wrote a book on a typewriter. And I still hear that sound in my head, that tapping of the typewriter, because my bedroom was right next to his office. 3 o'clock in the morning, he is still typing. And he'll be up 6, 7 o'clock with his, his suit on and his tie and his briefcase out the door. I don't know how he did it. And this went on for years. And I often ask myself, how in heaven's name did he write a book on a typewriter? I think about it, it's like, I'm so spoiled with that delete button,
Yeah.
So I admire him for that too.
Yeah. I can't imagine it either, right? I mean, I'm old enough, so I could have done a lot of stuff on typewriters back then as well when I was younger, but I can't imagine trying to go back and editing stuff with it.
I could not imagine. And this was back in the day before ebooks, before self-publishing. He went through Delray Publishers and Bain Publishers, and his books are still out there. I still sign contract for his book. His legacy lives on. So I'm really, really proud of him, and I'm proud to carry his name, so yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about your books. Let's talk about, I know, just like you said, you have 15
I have
total.
15 books, and one is a trilogy. That the debut novel that I've been talking about is this one. It's Reckless Beginnings, and this is the one that took 8 years to write, number one. And it was supposed to be just one book. I have this message. I want to get it out there. I'm done. Didn't work. This book is a trilogy, and I'm going to just kind of round this off to you. But these are the 3 books in the trilogy. There's Reckless Beginnings, Better Endings, and The Reunions. And what's special about these books is all based on my life. That is what's nice about these books. And Tammy Mellows is me. And 90% of everything that happened in these books happened. The only thing that basically changed is people's names and towns. But other than that, everything happened. But basically, these books, it started off with this book, and it's the whole trilogy is about lessons learned, mistakes made, bad decisions we made. And Tammy Mellows, as I said, is me. You see her grow through the trilogy. Each book has a different message. Reckless Beginnings, and I'll try and wrap this up quick, but Reckless Beginnings begins with a kind of age story. She's a young 12-year-old daughter. John, my father, moves to the United States. My sister moves over there, and my sister becomes a runaway. So the book begins with Tammy feeling helpless because she's stuck in England, unable to find her sister in the U.S., who became a runaway. Eventually, Tammy moves to the U.S. 3 years later, and her sister's still not found. So the book begins with, does Tammy ever find her sister? And of course, I'm not going to tell you. You're going to have to read the book. But Tammy also finds herself, her life in disarray, just up in turmoil because, she falls for this guy. Well, it turns out this guy is an addict. And this is a book of hope because she finds out that her life is being dictated by an addict. And in the book, I wrote the book in third person. In fact, I wrote the whole series in third person because I didn't want this to just be could be a boyfriend, a partner, whatever. It could be anybody finding themselves in a situation. So I didn't want it to just be my story, but it gives that person hope that you don't have to settle, and we all have choices. So this one is pretty much about that. But when I was done with that, I had readers saying, well, what happened to Tammy? After this situation is going, okay, here we go. Book 2 is going to have him. The readers wanted more, so I gave them more. And the Better Endings came around. And I have to say, I'm really proud, but these won Best Fiction Adventure, both of them, in 20 and 21 for what is it? Readers' Favorites. They gave them the gold medal, Best Fiction Adventure. This one year and this one the next year. But this one is all about, and we talked about this earlier, that we have to face our fears. Yeah. And this one, with the situation, Stephen, I wanted to just, it was how can I put it? This is a book of healing. I needed to heal from what I'd just gone through. So what I did is I found solace on the ocean, and I became a commercial fisherwoman. And I did this for 10 years, but I put myself in a situation that I was in an industry dominated by men. Yeah. But I wanted that challenge. I needed to prove to myself that I can do this, because I had just been through a life of that. I was thinking I was a failure. So I wanted to do something that really challenged me. And when a member of the fleet told me, he said, you'll never last through the season. Well, that was it. I'm going to prove this guy wrong. So this is about my adventures on the Pacific Ocean as a lobster commercial fisherwoman. And it's also, as my editor says, one of the sweetest love stories, because it's also where I met my husband, who is still my husband today. So it's adventure / romance story. So that's this one. And then book 3 is The Reunions. This is also one fiction adventure, best fiction adventure. And this one, the stories continue on right where the last book left off. And through the book, you'll notice I have 2 sisters, I have a mother, a father, etc., and we're scattered all over the globe. So this is about the reunions. My mother becomes really ill. She's in England, and she's not seen her daughters in the same room in the last 15, 20 years. So her wish is to see her daughters one last time, knowing that, she's ill. So this whole book is about, do the daughters achieve their mother's goal? Do they get back to England? So that's what this is about. And this one is a very emotional read. There is emotional as far as deaths go, and sibling emotions, illness emotions. So this one is a very emotional read.
Yeah.
Okay. So that is the trilogy. And
So
then what I did
before you get into the other
yes,
ones,
yes.
because technically it's you, but like you said, things are changed in terms of names and places.
Mm-hmm.
Did you find writing it to be healing? Did you find putting some of that stuff on paper to help maybe things that hadn't healed yet, or come to terms with some things?
That's a really good question. With Reckless Beginnings, out of the 3 books, and I've been asked this many times, which was the hardest to write? And it's definitely Reckless Beginnings. Not just because it's the first book I've ever written, and I've never written a book before. It's because of the subject matter.
Yeah.
And like I said, it's from the time when I was with an addict. I myself had never used drugs, but my life was totally affected by his habits. And this happened back in the 90s. And I wrote the book 20, I lose track of time so fast, 1990, something like that. Like 20 years later, I started writing this book. Subconsciously, I had blocked things out from that time in my life because it was not a good time, not a good place for me. When I wrote this book, I needed to show those emotions in my writing, just so the reader can feel, exactly what I went through. And there were parts of the book, and there is some trigger warnings, that there is some domestic abuse, and there is some, a little bit of, how can I put it, drug use, but I don't describe that part, but it's in there. And there was times in the book where I started writing one of those scenes, and I can't do this right now. And I walked away. I said, I'm not ready to do this. And so I jumped ahead and I wrote the next chapter, knowing what that was going to be about. And it took me sometimes 2 or 3 times attempt to write an actual scene that I subconsciously blocked out, but I needed to write it. And yes, it was really, really good therapy, because for many years prior to writing this book, I shamed myself because of the choices I made. But after writing the book, I realized a few things. Number one, I was very young. That's no excuse, but I was very young, very naive to drugs. I came from a family that was never around drugs, never used drugs. I mean, there's part of the book, this is how naive I was. This person, who was also the father of my child, he had what they call track marks on his arms. I thought he was a diabetic. That's how naive I was when it came to drugs. And he went along with it. So I was so naive, but I forgave myself while writing this book, because I had such a heavy weight on my shoulders that I put myself through this, and I put my son through this. So yeah, it was a lot of help. It was. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting because it is very difficult. It is difficult to get through some of those scenes when you're writing, but it does. You come out the other end. Most of the time, you come out on the other end. I don't want to say fully healed, but you clear a lot of that emotional weight that you had, with those experiences, and that's worth the whole process itself, right? Because that, taking some of that off of your soul, taking some of that off of your heart is worth doing it. And it's not easy, right? It's not easy to do, but it's worth that struggle.
It's not. And what I found really strange too, it took me a while, like I said, to write the book. I'm talking about Reckless Beginnings because that was the hardest one to write. And I was okay with putting my life out there in a book and writing my words. When I had to do my first interview, because the book did get a lot of media attention because of the subject matter. And I was on Fox News Radio and another one. And all of a sudden I found myself, oh my God, I have to actually talk about my life. Yeah. It was a totally, totally different outlook. And I didn't even think about that until I was actually in the green room waiting to go on the show. Now what are they going to ask me? This is about me. So that was kind of nerve-wracking. Even though the book had been out for 2 or 3 months, it was nerve-wracking that now I had to actually talk about it. So it's a different, scenario.
Yeah, it really is. So that's your first trilogy, right? That's your opening ones. You know, what the rest of your books, what are the genres, or what direction did you take in your stories?
Okay, well, when Better Endings, book 2 of the trilogy, was with my editor, I love writing so much. It's like, now what am I going to do? She's got my book. What am I going to do? So, okay, I've always wanted to write a romance. Don't know why. Don't know. Just something I wanted to try. I'm going to try to write this romance. So that's what I did. I wrote this romance. Well, that one romance turned into 8 books, which is these right here. And Slater is book 1. But with this was a fun book to write. And I just wrapped up this series October. The last book came out, Dream Big. But this is basically romantic suspense. And with these books, I'll backtrack a minute. With these books, I knew how the story was going to go. It's my life. I didn't have to plot it. I didn't have to plan it. It just kind of unfolded just like my life did. With these books, I didn't know where to start. I knew I wanted to write a romance. I knew, of course, it's going to be, a couple meeting. I love the beach. I love San Diego. I'm in California. I know the area well. Okay, it's going to be in California. It's going to be at San Diego Beach. That's all I knew about this book. And I sat down, and what I did, I just waited. I don't know how I should explain it. I just waited, and then these characters started coming into my head. This whole series, I never plotted, and I just waited for the characters to tell me their stories. And that's why I love this series so much, is because it follows 6 best friends, and that focuses on their lives, on their downfalls, on their ups, on their arguments, on their fights, everything you think about Friends. The TV show Friends, it's pretty much like that. And we have Slater, Sabella, Jill, Claire, Travis, and Ricky. And you follow them throughout the whole series, and each characters get their own book. That's why it turned into 9 series, because I got done with Slater, and all of a sudden he's like, hey, wait a minute, I got a story in my head. So, of course, I write Steve E's story. And then Claire says she has her story. And it went on and on and on.
Yeah.
And then Jill said she had her story. So this is how the series went. And there is steam in it. It's not over the top. I didn't want the steam to overtake the story, but there is steamy or spice in there. And with Dream Big is the one that I wrapped up the story with. This one was a blast to write, and there's a couple of reasons why. Number one, throughout the whole series, all the characters appear, but this one had to finalize every character, wrap up their storyline.
Yeah.
But what I did in this one, it takes place at Catalina Island, which is one of my favorite islands here in California, and we used to go there every year on vacation. So I wanted to go back there in my book. So I made it take place in Catalina Island. But what I did was I took Tammy and Dwayne, who is my husband in the book, into this book. I wanted to meet my characters. So I put myself in this book and met my characters. And that's how I ended this book. And it's really cool. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. That's great.
That's what I did.
Yeah, and it's you mentioned a good point about not really plotting it and just kind of writing as you went. And that I love that, right? I love when you let the story organically grow on its own, because it'll just come to you if you just let it and not try to force kind of your idea of what you want it to be. And sometimes it's a much better story, right? Than
I think
something you really thought about.
I think it's more natural. I mean, Eve, book 2 of the Sabella series, she was in my head saying, I have my story. Slater, book 1 was Slater and Sabella. And Eve learned while I was writing the book that she was one of Slater's ex-girlfriends from her past. So I'm thinking in my head, oh, she's going to come back and try and get Slater back. She's going to try and win Slater back from Sabella. So I tried to write it like that. No, it went in totally another direction.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, I give up. You tell me what's happened. And what did happen just totally blew me away. So I just don't fight it.
Yeah.
Even if it's something I don't like, there's a reason why it's happening. And another example is with this book, Slater book 1. Like I said, I had the boy and the girl and their names picked out. But when I started writing, this guy Davin was the first name that popped into the book. I'm like, who's this guy? I have no idea who you are. Why are you in my book? I'm trying to get to Slater and Sabella, but he just kept showing up in the first chapter of the book. And in the series, he played a big part. And I see now why it began with him. And that's all I can say.
Yeah.
But I had no idea who he was.
Yeah, I love that, because there's so many authors that talk about that, about a character that wasn't planned, or a character that was planned for, say, a scene, and just never leaves, right? The character's like, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to stay here all the way through. And you run with it, right? You just let it go.
And then sometimes, my group in Facebook knows that I have a wonderful group in Facebook that the readers are just fantastic. And I'll go in there and give them updates on my writing while I'm writing a book and all this stuff. And they love it when I go in and kind of say the word bitch about my characters. But I do, and I'll go in and say, well, bloody Jill is not talking to me. I want to get this book finished, and she has nothing to say. It's like I'm waiting. And I don't fight it. If I don't hear her, or however you want to describe it, then I'll go do something else. Jill's not ready to talk to me, fine. And it might be a couple of days. Some people call it writer's block. I just call it a stubborn character, because that's what she is. And eventually she'll come in and talk to me. And my readers will go, is Jill talking yet? Or whatever character I've been bitching about, So it's kind of like this sometimes. But I let them lead me. Yeah, I do.
Yeah, it really is interesting to me how often that happens, and it's almost always a better version of the story when you do let it go that way. When you do let it just take you where it wants to go, right?
Yeah, just don't force it. So far, none of my characters, like favorite characters, have died. I don't know how I would handle that if my characters tell me, well, Claire's dying. I'm like, oh no, everyone loves Claire. I mean, it didn't happen in my book, but it's like, oh my God, how can I do this to my readers? So knock on wood, that never happens, because I don't know how I would avoid it. If, a group of my characters say, well, Claire has this and she's dying. I'm just using Claire as an example. Do I really want to write that? But if the characters are telling me that, I'd have to find a way to deal with it.
Yep.
I haven't come across that bridge yet.
Yeah. But it would be interesting, because basically, just like in real life, it would be a big turning point for everybody, right? Every single character that comes in contact with her is going to change from that experience. So it would take you on a completely new direction.
And we have to remember, we want our books to be real. Well, our characters in real life would not be immortal. We all die sometime, whether it be, in the middle of her wedding or whatever. People do die. And that's a reality check when you write books based on, real characters that you want to see real. They might die. Don't hate me.
So after that, you have another series or more standalone books?
Right now I'm writing, and that's another thing too, with my trilogy and my series. I had no idea whether there'd be a standalone until the end of the book, and then I knew right away there was going to be more. So right now I am working on another book. It's called Secrets Told. And my goal is to finish this by the end of this month. And I'm at 65,000 words, and I think it's going to be about 75,000. So I think I'm on track to reach that goal. As far as being a standalone or a series, now that I'm towards the end of the book, I'm thinking it's going to be a standalone. And my readers will be surprised, because I've always told them I don't know how to write a standalone, because all of my books keep going and going and going. But this one, I think, is going to be a standalone. So I might surprise them with that. And it would be kind of nice to actually write a standalone for a change. So we'll see.
Yeah, that's great. Let's go back to, for all your books in general, I have a couple of questions that we kind of talked about a little bit before. I always like to ask, what was the favorite scene, right? You could take it from the first trilogy, you could take it from the romance series. But is there a scene that stands out to you from either of those series that you would consider your favorite scene? And by favorite, it could be the actual scene itself, or it could be how that scene came together.
For me, I'm going to say better endings. This one right here. This was one when I was a commercial fisherwoman. This one, unlike Reckless Beginnings, which was really hard to write, this was such a joy to write. I had so much fun writing this because by the time I got around to writing it, I retired from fishing. So this took me back to a place that I just loved because I still miss the ocean. I do miss it. And this took me back to those fun days on the ocean and just the adventures that we had. Every time we went out, you just never knew what was going to happen. You never, you know, it's just laughter after laughter or challenge after challenge, or the weather would suddenly turn and we find ourselves in the fog or in a storm. So this one just kept me on my toes writing. And the funny thing is, after I wrote this book, I told myself, oh, I should have put that in this book. I should have put that in this book. What ended up happening is after this trilogy was done, I wrote a short story collection with my husband on adventures that we didn't include in this book that popped in my head after the book was written. And the readers loved it because it was still Tammy and Dwayne, but short adventures that didn't make it into the book. So this one, there's just many scenes that I just loved writing. So.
Yeah, that I can understand that, you know, because like you said, that is especially being on the water, that whole experience. You can imagine there's just a lot of great memories, experiences that you had.
Yeah, and the fleet the fleet was just like a family. We all watched out for each other, you know, we all helped each other. We had problems with our boats. You know, they were just there for you. And that's just the way it was with the fleet. So yeah, I've often said that was one of the most best times of my life. Other than being an author, because I discovered that now. But being on the ocean, oh my God, it was fabulous. I loved it. Yeah.
And then on the opposite side of that, I like to always ask about the hardest scene. Would that probably be the first book?
Yeah, Reckless Beginnings and the time through the abusive scenes, that was really hard. There is a couple in the reunions that are very emotional, which stemming from family illness, and I also go into my cancer. Those are emotional, and they were hard to write too.
Yeah, I can imagine on that side.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, you talked about the other book that you're writing right now, but I like to always ask, there's like a bucket list question that I always like to ask. And, you know, and I want you to take it in any direction you think about, right? And it's really, the question is when your writing career is done, right? When you finish writing everything, is there something in that period that you want to make sure you do accomplish, right? And it could be, like you said, on the second series, you're like, oh, I want to try writing a romance. So it could be a genre maybe you thought about but haven't done yet. Or is it maybe a storyline that you want to attempt? It's a big storyline that will take time to kind of put together, and you're like, it's not the right time yet. But is there something you've thought about that I really want to do this at some point?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. I do have a series I know is going to be a series that's been mulling around in my head since I was almost finished with the Sabella series. But I just got done with an 8-book series, and this series I've been writing for the last 3 to 4 years. I, for whatever reason, wanted to take a break from getting wrapped up in another series. And I know it's going to be a series. For whatever reason, I know. So I started writing Secrets Told, not knowing if it's going to be a series or not. And I'm glad that I did it this way, because I think it's not going to be a series. With the one that I'm wrapping around in my head, I could take that series for a long time. And I do want to get it written. But I have to mindset myself that if you start this series, you're going to be working on it for the next few years. And you have to be okay with that. Just with the Sabella series, it was unexpected. And after 8 books, I was ready. I know of authors that write 20, 30 books in a series. I don't know if I can go that long because I'd like to venture out into other genres. And you mentioned if I want to write any other genres. And this came up earlier in our conversation. We talked about our fears. There's one genre that I absolutely love reading, and that's historical fiction. I love reading historical fiction, basically World War II. And I would love to write it. But what scares me is the research. You have to be so accurate with your research. No matter what kind of historical fiction you write, you have to do your research, because if you don't, the readers are going to call you out. And you have to be so thorough. And I remember my dad, you know, he did science fiction, but he spent a year researching each book before he even put pen to paper. Back then we can say pen to paper. So for me, I don't know if I could ever write historical fiction. If I do, it will be a challenge that I set for myself. And I'll be pretty damn proud if I do it. And because there's a book that my dad talked about this often when he was alive. His mother was from Germany and his father was from England. And he was an English soldier. He went back to England, and my grandmother, I'm going to make this real quick. My grandmother became pregnant and traveled across Europe to find my grandfather during World War II. And I would love to tell that. My dad always wanted to tell that story. He has all the notes that he took from my grandmother. He never got around to doing it because he unexpectedly passed away. I have those notes, and I would love to tell that story. But again, there's, of course, gaps here and there. Yeah. I would have to do my research 100%. But if there's anything I want to do, I'd love to do that as a gift to my grandmother and my father.
Yeah, that would be beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So.
And it is a great point to bring up as the research. I usually ask that question as well, because it is important, right? And writers need to understand how important that is.
It really is.
But yeah, and the level of research depends on what you're writing about, right? You can do the full rabbit hole research to make sure you know everything about it, but you have to at least learn enough to know what you're talking about, right? You may not have to know it inside and out, but you have to know what you're talking about, because you made the perfect point. It's almost guaranteed that the reader that does know will read your book. And what happens is they may not give you a bad review or anything, but it takes them out of the story. And once you lose that connection to the story, can't get them back in, right? And that's the worst thing you want to do to a reader.
Yeah. And that's one thing I'm finding on this book I'm writing now. I got kind of spoiled in my other books. The trilogy, there was no research. It was my life. There's nothing to research. I know what happened. In the Sabella series, I know California, I know San Diego, I know Catalina Island. The only times I had to do research is medical issues. The kind of treatment someone got for certain medical issues, that stuff I did have to look up. This book I'm writing now, I'm having so much fun with the research because it's taking me to places I've never even heard of, I've never even been to. And, it takes me to New York, Manhattan. It takes me to a farm in Connecticut. It takes me to a town I've never even heard of, which is Hope, Alaska. And I now want to go to that town because this town just sounds gorgeous. It takes me to Whittier, Alaska. And I'm like, it's just taking me to all these places that I actually had to do the research on, because I said, I'm going to make this. Well, actually, I didn't. I said, I know this book would take me to places I've never been to, but it's the characters that are telling me where I'm going. That part I love too. So this is a whole new ball game.
When do you have a plan as of right now in terms of when you might release that one?
This one I was hoping to get out by the end of June, but that's only 3 months away. So, this book, I've tried to kick out 2 books a year. My last book, Dream Big, came out in October, so that's not going to happen this year because of the research I'm doing for this book. Yeah. I'm taking, of course, much longer, and it's also a lot bigger book. The Sabella series are like 150, 180 pages. I'm already on page 260 or 40 on this book. So my goal now is to get the first draft done by the end of this month, which I think I'm going to do. And then I'll spend a month cleaning it up because it's a hot mess. When I write my first draft, I just write. I don't go back. I don't reread. I just keep writing. Because if I start going back and rereading, I'm all over the place. I can't do that. So I just keep writing. Even if I see, the is spelled backwards or, I whatever. I just don't pay attention to it. I just want to get the bones of the story down. Once that's done, then I go to my favorite part of writing a book, and that is slowing down and going through it with a fine tooth, adding pieces here, adding fluff here, taking out this. I love cleaning up the first draft. and I will spend a month doing that, maybe read it 2 or 3 times, and then it goes to my editor. All this takes time, and my goal now is to have it out by August. I want to shoot for August is what I'm going to do. So
yeah, it'll probably be a good reset for you to release the one for the year.
Yeah,
especially if you're planning on going into the new series.
Mm-hmm.
That'll at least
Yeah,
give you
that's great.
Again, like a reset for you to jump back into it.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it's very interesting, the World War II story. I mean, I really do hope you get to write that, because those type of things, when you have those stories that could get lost, especially when it's from the family, right? Things like that, where there's no way to really pass them down, especially when they're larger stories. I mean, you could tell the core part of it, and that can get passed down to your kids and further down. But when it is a much grander story like that, it really is a great thing to be able to put that down on paper and let that story kind of live on.
Yeah, and I do have, like I said, I have the notes that my dad had, but there's a lot of gaps there. So I'd have to spend some time following my family or my grandmother and grandfather. I don't know where to start with that. I don't know. Yeah. What's gone in my head is I have the bones of their story or her story traveling across Europe to England, and I could put that into historical fiction based on true events, where I have the bones of her story, but it's within, like my book. My book is based on true events, so that's rolled in my head too, where I can still write her story, but it's wrapped into something. That's something I haven't figured out.
Yeah, that's very, very interested to see if you do that, because that would be a great story.
I'll keep you posted on that one.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Yeah, I've enjoyed the conversation, learning about all your books, learning about your dad being a writer as well. I love sci-fi, so I'll definitely have to check out some of his books. My uncle, that was probably his favorite genre as well. So he had, a ton of books in sci-fi. So be interesting to kind of read that, because it's, I haven't read a lot of sci-fi in a while. Most of what I did read before was parts of his collections and stuff. So it would be interesting to something to get back into again.
Yeah, he started writing in '79, and his very first book, David novel, was Inherit the Stars. And it is still today his most successful book. I signed contracts for that. I just signed one two months ago for that book. It is a constant bestseller for him, and it's the first book he ever wrote. So, look that one up. Inherit the Stars.
Okay, yeah, definitely. I definitely gotta check that out. I mean, it may really, because I was born in '71, so a lot of the stuff when I was reading was really like early '80s and stuff like that. His collection, so it may have been in his collection. It's hard to say.
It might have been '79 it came out. So
yeah, that's great. Again, I really do want to thank you for coming on, Tina. This was great. I want to remind the viewers that I will have all the links for Tina's books, website, socials, whatever she wants to link down below. If you have a question for either of us, please, leave something down. If you have a question, ask us about our books, ask us about writing, anything. We'd be happy to answer those. And definitely don't forget to subscribe and hit the notifications so you don't miss all these amazing, talented authors I have coming up. Thank you again, Tina, for coming on. I really did enjoy the conversation.
Yeah, I did too. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And thank you, viewers, as well. Goodbye.
Take care.